All right. So, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the last DHCW Digital Governance and Safety Committee meeting of 2022. There will be a private session after the end of the public session, and in that we'll discuss matters that are not appropriate to discuss in a private session, but we do share a summary of our discussions at the next committee meeting. I hope that those who are joining us or watching the recording have been able to access the committee papers, which have been uploaded on the DHCW website for members of the committee and for the public to access. This meeting is being recorded, and the recording will be posted on the DHCW website for members of the public and stakeholders to access. And my colleague Chris Darling tells me that we have a bit of a fan base, and the recording is downloaded and engaged with. So thank you for everyone in the members of the public externally who take an interest in the business of this committee. I would like to advise committee members that there will be a 10 to 15 minute comfort break if anyone needs to walk that dog, planned just after item 3.4. I can be flexible if you need it earlier, just ping me and I'm sure we can work that into the order of business. So, welcome and introductions. In the interest of time, as per our usual way of operating, I'm going to ask that committee members introduce themselves when they present or at the time they first ask a question, make a comment. However, I would like to welcome our newest member of the DG&S committee, Marilyn Bryan-Jones, who has recently been appointed as an independent member of the DHCW board. Welcome, Marilyn. It's great to have you here. And I'm going to make an exception and ask Marilyn just to introduce herself now.
Good afternoon, really pleased to be here this afternoon. I come to the Digital Healthcare Wales Committee with the background of equality, diversity and inclusion. So I'm really pleased, I'm hoping that I can bring my prior experience in strategy and operational and community matters to the forum and to the committee. So thank you very much. Welcome.
Thank you, Marilyn. And I think that's a really special set of expertise, and particularly the community voice is going to be a very valuable one for the committee. So thank you, Marilyn. And I also want to welcome Andrew Warburton, who's Head of Information and the Health Records Programme, who'll be covering the Information Services Assurance Report on behalf of Rachel Powell, whose apologies we've received. I think Rachel is away on DHCW business attending an industry conference, and apologies have also been received from Ivan, and his contributions will be more than adequately covered by Michelle Sell, who is deputising on his behalf. So with the preliminary matters out of the way, let's move on to 1.3, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? Well, there's one that I'm going to make to the committee. So as members of the committee know, I am a co-founder of a company called Precision Life. We're a company that accesses consented non-identifiable patient information for secondary purposes, by which I mean for research and innovation uses to understand disease biology. And we have a research and innovation item on the agenda today, so I think it's important that I share that. Furthermore, just this week, I'd like to share that Precision Life's CEO was on a panel with Chris Orton of the Sale Data Bank, which is based at Swansea University, as part of a Health Data Research UK, HDR UK, and Association of British Pharmaceutical Industries, ABPI event. organised by the Breathe Hub. Breathe Hub is part of HDR UK and is focused on respiratory health and research, informatics research. DHCW obviously work very closely with SAIL in Swansea. They process data on their behalf. The subject of that panel wasn't the SAIL data, but I think it's important to share that. I think, moreover, as a sort of topic, the UK government has published a number of policy documents regarding the secondary use of healthcare data, not all of which will impact Wales, but I think therefore all the members of the committee would anticipate that there'll be more coverage of this subject in the newspapers and media, and maintaining the trust of everyone in the healthcare service about how we process, store, access healthcare data is critical. So it's timely, therefore, that during this meeting that there will be a topic dealing with the safeguards that DHCW have in place for information governance that assure how data is processed for primary delivering healthcare and secondary uses in a manner that's consistent with patient safety, confidentiality, and privacy. So I think that's really important. Just before I move on, I expect that there'll be further future occasions when these potential conflicts really mean that it won't be appropriate for me to chair either all of a session, all of a committee, or parts of a committee, because the subject of secondary use of healthcare data is being discussed. And I want to assure anyone who's watching that that's something that we're aware of, we've discussed it, and in that situation, we have a very able vice chair in David Selway, who will take over and is more than able to make sure that potential conflict is managed. So I think that's important to say all that. Okay, so moving on to 1.4, matters arising. I haven't had any advance notice of any additional matters, but are there any I should be aware of? Excellent. So moving on to part 2, the consent agenda. The matters on the consent agenda were part of everyone's board documents or committee documents. I haven't received any questions or comments on those documents as yet. So can I ask, has anyone got any comments that they'd like to make now on the minutes? Carwyn, I can see you put your hand up. And can you unmute yourself? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Hi. So I'm Carwyn Jones. I'm the Interim Executive Director of Operations at DHCW. So just a comment on the minutes. If I can just get them open here. It's just a point of clarification, really. So in section 3.4, it talked about DHCW 0921 risk. And we talked about the demand had been challenging due to COVID on getting networking equipment. Yeah. What we did was we split the order into 3 purchase orders so that we could receipt complete orders if one of them happened to slip into next financial year. So it's just, I think we just need to reword that just a little bit to clarify that bit. And then there was a discussion about the project cost and the at the time we didn't know what the new data center cost was going to be. The energy is the big unknown as well in terms of what that does for us next year. So we were anticipating that we might be able to make some savings on the cost of the data center, but that the cost of energy would more than likely cancel that out completely and possibly add some costs to it. So it's just to clarify those 2 things, really.
Thank you, Carwyn, and I remember that. So thank you for reminding us of that. I can see in the information services room, their hands are up, but I'm not sure who wants to make a point. So
It's just myself, Rowan. It's Darren Lloyd, Associate Director for Information Governance and Patient Safety. I just spotted one very minor typo just on page 7. It refers to Westminster as opposed to Westminster.
thank you, Darren, and that's proof that you've read those very closely. I'm sure Caris will make a note of that and update the minutes to reflect those comments. I have one question that it's really good that Carwyn is on the call as a Welsh speaker. Chris, how do we check that the Welsh language minutes reflect the English language, because they'll both need to be updated?
Yeah, so we get the translation through NWSSP shared services, and then we can use Carwyn as our secondary source of assurance for those that have, those amendments we've just asked for, if Carwyn would allow us to.
Well, I was going to say that part of what they do is they do an internal review process from NWSSP. But if there are any points that in particular people feel that I need to check to make sure for accuracy, then I can do that.
Thank you, Carwyn, because technical accuracy and translation is quite difficult, I think. So diolch yn fawr, and I'm very grateful if I can action you to make sure the Welsh minutes are updated as well. Fantastic. And also the forward work plan, I think we've got lots coming up. When people reviewed that, was there anything that they noticed was missing or hadn't been captured? No. Excellent. Okay, thank you very much for that. So let's move straight on to the main agenda. And the first item, which is, I think, the corporate risk register. Chris, can you lead us off, please?
Yeah, there was just the actions, Chair. So I don't know if we're just noting those. Happy to note.
I'm happy to note them. I think this, yeah.
Yeah, because they're all updated and either underway or closed. So
exactly.
If you're happy, I will move on then to the risk register. And Chair, I'm going to start with a quick presentation just to run through some analysis of risk over the last 18 months. It was a discussion we actually had at this committee meeting in August. I think you asked that we do a bit of a deep dive on the risks assigned to this committee that have been there for a period of time. So in doing that, we've undertaken some work just to assess which risks have been on our risk register since we established as a statutory body. So I'm just going to run us through this. Hopefully you can see the screen okay. This is Appendix A in the packs, if that helps. So let me just... So the first thing is just for a bit of context. Obviously, we established just coming on 18 months ago on the 1st of April. We approved a risk and board assurance framework strategy at the end of May 2021. One important part of that strategy, I think, was a committee assignment approach. So corporate risks would be assigned to each of our committees for additional scrutiny and oversight. And corporate risks being approved and going on to the corporate risk register would be done with the approval of the executive lead for that risk. Corporate risks, as you'll be aware, are reviewed on a monthly basis by the risk management group and discussed at our management board. And during that 18-month period that we're looking at, from the 1st of April to the end of September 22, each of the committees have had deep dives on the risks on the corporate risk register assigned to them. We started that process through this committee just about this time last year. We did information governance, information services, and then ICT risks. We've also more recently approved our board assurance framework, and as part of that process, we're assigning our corporate risks to our 5 strategic missions as part of the board assurance framework. And as mentioned, we are now carrying out this 18-month analysis. So what have we identified? So we started on the 1st of April with 14 corporate risks on our risk register. During the 18-month period, there's been 52 individual risks managed during that time period. Of these, 7 have remained active on the risk register for that 18-month period. So there have been 7 that we haven't been able to mitigate down to a point where they've been closed or removed from the corporate risk register because they're suitably downgraded in terms of risk score. During that time, 38 new corporate risks have been escalated to sit on the corporate risk register, and 26 corporate risks have been downgraded during that 18-month period. So just about spot on half of the corporate risks have been removed during that period, that 18-month period. In terms of those 7 corporate risks that have stayed on the risk register since we established, there's 5 you'll see there assigned to this committee, 4 of which are in the papers for a deep dive in the private session, so CANISC, fault domains, and then 2 private risks, which the risk identifier number is included. And there's 1 which we'll come back to shortly, new requirements impact on resources in the plan, which has been on since the start as well. Just to note for the committee, the 2 assigned to the Audit and Assurance Committee have had deep dives at the recent Audit and Assurance Committee meeting to go through those. So in terms of the movements, the graph on the left just shows our current snapshot number of risks on the corporate risk register by severity, and the graph on the right just shows during that period the number escalated and the number removed. The yellow line at the bottom shows the DG&S committee assigned risks, so fairly steady through to November 21, then an increase in the number of risks assigned, a drop, and then a further increase. And it's fair to say, I think particularly for this committee, a big drive of the increase in the number of corporate risks has been as a result of the number of cyber related risks that have gone on to the corporate risk register since our establishment. So you'll see the table on the right just shows where we've had additional new risks since the 1st of April, where they've come from in terms of domains. So the security related domains, obviously there's been 10 new ones added, which are generally relating to cyber security, which has driven the increase of those number of risks assigned to this committee. As I mentioned earlier, we're also assigning risks to this by strategic mission as part of the board assurance framework. This isn't an exact science. It's fair to say, I think, that some of the risks, span a number of our strategic missions, but we haven't allocated them to more than one because I think it gets confusing at that point. So we've just tried to include the primary strategic mission that the risk relates to. And again, probably no surprise that the strategic mission 2 is where the majority is, reflecting our live operational services, be our highest risk area. So I'm just going to stop presenting. That was the Appendix A in the packs, Chair, and that was I think the analysis you had asked for at the last meeting in terms of where are the risks that we're struggling to mitigate down. We've then included in the papers Appendix B in this public session, and as I mentioned, there's 4 deep dive reports that we'll come on to talk about in the private session. But if I just start with the one that we're talking about today in terms of risk that's been on since the 1st of April. So I'm going to run through this briefly. I'll invite Michelle in if she's got any comments, because this risk, Ruth Chapman kind of owns it, but Ruth sits within Michelle's area, so she might want to just comment on this. So the risk included, this was drafted and added to the corporate risk register just before we established, so in March 2020, a year before, at the start of the COVID pandemic crisis, where planning shifted from a 3-year cycle to a quarterly cycles. And I think it's probably important to note the risk has morphed. I know Ruth emphasised this point. It could have changed actually in terms of risk. We could have taken it off and put a new risk on, but essentially it's morphed from specific impact and implications of planning for COVID to impact and implications for planning for COVID and the recovery. So there is a distinction there, but I think fundamentally the risk is the same. So the risk description you'll see in the packs, if new requirements for digital solutions to deal with COVID, recovery of services and other new areas of work continue, then staff may need to be moved from other deliverables in the plan, resulting in non-delivery of our objectives and ultimately a delay in benefits being realised by the service. And I think there's probably a few examples where we've seen huge impact, A, from COVID, B, from things like digital meds portfolio. I think last year wasn't originally in the plan and suddenly had to absorb that link and risk more recently. But I'll invite Michelle, rather than go through it, to comment, because it's very much in her area and kind of owns the risk.
Thank you, Chris. And certainly owns the plan, and colleagues will be aware, obviously, we're now working on our plan for next year. And this continues to be a challenge for us, I think, in terms of how can we plan in capacity. Obviously, we're linking in with Welsh Government and with the health boards and trusts to get the most current understanding of the requirements going forward. I think it would be fair to say there is still a degree of uncertainty in the COVID response even itself, and that may, things may change as they move forward. And as Chris said, we actually quite successfully, I think, moved resources to be able to stand up some services quite quickly, but it clearly impacted on the other activities we had anticipated we'd deliver. And there are other examples, another recent incident colleagues will be aware of, where we had to stand up a new service to support our colleagues in the health boards and trusts. So we are working on that. We're working on it with the planning team. What I would like to do as the plan moves forward, and that we will be bringing this to the board to have the conversation, is try and create capacity in the plan so we can be a bit more agile, so that we are able to respond perhaps in a slightly different way as we move forward. It does mean that we try not to put quite so much in the plan up front, in terms of our initial ambition. And we've created, so we've got quite a good change control process now into the plan. So we're at least highlighting the implications when we make these kind of changes, and we can make sure that those are flagged up through the management board to the SHA board, so that you're aware of the decisions that are being made. As Chris has indicated, generally these are things that they are top priority items. I think that's agreed, and therefore we have to move resources to address them. But where there is an element of perhaps choice in that, or perhaps reprioritization, then we have got a process that we manage that through to the management board. So happy to take any questions on that. My sense is, and Ruth and I have discussed it in detail, it does remain a risk for us, and it is something that we're going to have to continue to manage as we move forward, kind of in collaboration with our stakeholders, really. And that's the way that we've been seeking to manage that to date.
David, could I ask you to comment or ask a question?
Yeah, I've got an observation and a question. So the observation is in the corporate risk report, we've listed risk 295 as new, but we've also listed it as reduced. So is that correct, in as much as we added it at the start of the quarter, but it's been reduced during the quarter? Is that my correct reading, Chris?
Yeah, David, so you're spot on with that one. I was going to come on to the changes in the risk score. That one has been added since the last DG&S committee by Carwyn. It was subsequently then reduced, but not to the point where it's come off the corporate risk register. So yeah, that's happened since the last meeting.
Okay, fine. Thanks for the clarification. The other observation I had, question possibly, is we now have 3 separate risks, all related to resource constraints or availability. We've got 259, 292 and 295. They're all subtly different because I suspect it's looking at it from a different perspective. I just wanted to ask the question, are we happy that's the right way to present it, or is there some consolidation of a risk around resources that we should be considering?
Yeah, I'm happy to start this one, but I know a lot of them relate to Carwyn's area, so he might want to come in. But from my perspective, David, when risks go on, I'm really keen that where possible, we're clear that there's clear mitigating action that directly links to the risk that's gone on, so we can track it and move it off. And I think the distinction between some of the risks is, you know, if the resource in one area is bolstered, that risk can be reduced. Whereas if we encompass them into a generic risk, you kind of wait until all areas have had that level of assurance that they've had the additional resource.
Okay.
I'll let Carwyn come in because in case he wants to comment.
Yeah, so I've looked at two of those in particular. So, and they are because they will have different mitigating actions, you know what I mean, as in, and I think there's a general acceptance of the fact that recruitment of people into these technically specialist sort of roles is always going to prove a challenge. But in these cases, we needed to escalate them so that we got appropriate action taken. So 295 was about lack of resources in one of the particular teams in our integration and reference teams, which was directly impacting on IMTP deliverables, you know, for that particular team. And I think are we gonna come on and talk about it later, Chris? Because if so, I'll give the update then. Or
I think
do it now.
Do it now, Carwyn.
Yeah, that's fine. So in that case, the paper was discussed at one of the weekly executive team meetings, and it's been agreed that we will start the recruitment immediately of people into those teams. You know what I mean? As in, I've just checked the action, the minutes from that executive team meeting. Yeah, so absolutely. Whereas 292 is about making sure that we protect enough capacity to do our business as usual work when we do our planning work, because we have a habit as an organisation and as in teams and individuals to want to please and do new things, you know what I mean, as in, and then quite often other stuff, you know, is left behind, you know, things that we need to do and must do to maintain security and availability and, you know, those sorts of things. And we always struggle to get that balance right. Part of this is to kind of to make sure that we can focus the resources on that particular area.
Okay, thanks for the clarification. I'm happy we keep them all separate.
Thanks, David.
So,
do you want me to carry on through the report? Or
yeah, John, and I've got some comments, but I think they're more general than on the specific example that we've talked about just now.
Okay, I'll just work through quickly, just so we've got to the end of that then. So just in terms of new risks for this committee since the last meeting, there is one 0294 around service ownership and resource commitment agreement for the NHS Wales Act. That one has been removed now from the corporate risk register. At the time of producing the papers, it was still on there. That's come off now following agreement of the service model during the private beta and leading up to go live. The other new risks, Carwyn's mentioned 0295, the resources to implement key IMTP milestones, and referenced the paper that's been discussed and agreed to help support that. I think it was once resources are in place, Carwyn and Myron said that would probably come off the risk register, but that we're not at that point at the moment. 0296, allergies and adverse reactions, single source. So Ridian's approved that to be added to the corporate risk register since our last committee meeting. So Rid, I don't know if you or Darren want to comment on that one briefly.
My comment would be that it's always been a risk. It needs to be visible, and we'll do what we can to mitigate it in combination with the work that's in Welsh Clinical Portal and the work that will come out of the digital medicines transformation programme.
Thanks, Ridian. We've had a number of reduced risks. So as David picked up, one was 0295, which was also a new risk during this period, but it has dropped down in terms of risk score following approval of the additional resources. And then the network equipment delays in relation to data center 2, the move. Carwyn's approved that one in terms of the risk score going down since our last committee meeting. And then finally, I'd just note the DPIF funding letters, which we had a fair discussion on at the last committee meeting, has come off the corporate risk register following receipt of a number of those letters. The final one I was going to pick out was the data promise risk. And I'll just invite Darren to comment on this, because we've had some correspondence that's probably worth, for the committee's benefit, just to put on the record, because I know this has been discussed over the last 12 months or so in terms of corporate risk for us. Darren?
Thanks, Chris. Yes, in terms of the data promise risk itself, our Chief Executive Officer, Helen Thomas, has received a letter from Welsh Government setting out various responsibilities around the data promise, and to a certain extent proposing where DHCW could assist in part of that data promise work or programme of work that's currently with Welsh Government. So I'm leading the part of that response back to Welsh Government on the basis of understanding what we could do in that space, or what we feel Welsh Government needs to do in that space in order to understand kind of the transparency and the requirements of communicating out to the general public around use of data and the current arrangements around safe governance, safe use of data, and the governance framework that is already in place, but potentially, basically. So the response to that letter will be a draft response will be going back to Helen over the next couple of weeks for her to respond back to Welsh Government to kind of formulate a plan between us and them.
And the final point on the corporate risks assigned to this committee, the switching service risk, which I know has been an area we've discussed in a bit of detail. Just to note, internal audit have recently completed their review of that service. So once we have receipts, I think Rachel and Andy probably have got the draft report back from that. But once we've got that, clearly we'll be looking to review that corporate risk in line with some of the observations and comments, recommendations that they make as part of that external audit review of the switching service. So Rowan, in terms of the report, I'll stop there. It was to note the current position in terms of risks, the changes, and then the analysis that we've done of the risks that have remained, noting that we've got 4 to discuss in the private session.
So thank you for that, Chris. And I guess my comment is, I think that's been a really useful analysis, because for me, it's demonstrated that we are managing risk. Risks are moving off. We are getting more sophisticated in how we identify risks. I mean, particularly the security risk, which I know the reason why those got split, and those were very sound risk management approaches that were taken. So I think that's really positive for the organisation to recognise that through our first sort of year and a half of operation. I think the second bit, which is a sort of I'm not sure how helpful an observation it is, but we have a number of risks that will come on at an initial level. There'll be a current level, which however it moves, it's the current level. But for those long-lasting risks, they're often the current level is a long way from the target level. And I'm wondering whether that target level is ever achievable. What is stopping us achieving the target? Because I don't think it's necessarily because there's a casualness to the risks that we're handling, and I am interested if any of the execs have got some insight there over this issue of what is achievable around these risks and how that relates to what our target level would be. Is there any comments on that? Carwyn?
Yeah, so I think I'll come in on that generally, but probably we're thinking about the cybersecurity ones in particular. You know what I mean? As in, our targets have to be in line with our risk appetite that we've defined for these areas. And our risk appetite for cybersecurity is I can't remember the exact words, but pretty low. Yeah, and so that means that we have to put target scores in of those levels, you know what I mean? As in, and yes, I agree with you, achieving them, certainly in the cybersecurity world, is a bit like, you know, is a bit like chasing your tail, isn't it? You know what I mean? As in, you're going around because new things appear all of the time, which means that it's almost impossible to get there. You know what I mean? As in, and I think that that is just the reality with some of the cybersecurity risks, is that they will remain on there for very long periods of time, because as soon as we've plugged one hole, another hole will appear somewhere else. And without having loads of very specific risks, we have to have some fairly generic ones like we've got, you know what I mean, as in, you know, around data loss, data, you know, those sorts of overall categories, I suppose. And that is the challenge, you know, because otherwise you go into that we need to do this very specific thing, and then we've done that, we can close the risk. But that isn't appropriate, I don't think, of having so many things on the corporate risk level. So it's just some thoughts from me.
So thank you, Cohen. I think that's a really good observation. Chris?
No, I agree entirely with what Karen was saying. I think first, I mean, and one of the benefits of this exercise, it does make you reflect on target risk score, and importantly, what are the milestones or metrics that you can use to kind of agree that you've hit that target risk score. And I think some of the private risks that we do the deep dive on later will, you know, Carwyn will probably be able to give a couple of examples where once we've got to this level, I'm happy that this comes off the corporate risk register. That's not the case for all risks, and by their very nature, they're uncertain. And I think Michelle's risk was a really good example where when the pandemic hit, you know, there was a risk that was identified, and the uncertainty around the pandemic and the planning requirements continued and continued. I think we probably all thought within 6 months we'd have more clarity, and it didn't pan out like that. So I think some target dates and milestones we need to be disciplined enough to try and be clear on those, but we also need to recognize that there is a lot of uncertainty with some of these areas, I think.
Thank you, Chris. Are there any other comments on that? So I think it's something that we can't resolve now. I'm not expecting anyone to resolve it now, but I think it's something that should be taken away, Chris, perhaps in discussion at the appropriate exec forum, and a reflection on whether the board's risk appetite is the appropriate risk appetite, or whether there are insufficient resources within the organisation, financial, people, technical, to achieve a measure of control that is consistent with the stated board risk appetite, because those things should connect, and I think it would be useful for us to spell out those relationships and dependencies, because as we grow and we're bringing more and more programs under the DHCW umbrella, the complexity of the different programs, all with their various risks, becomes it's an end-to-end type problem. It's getting larger, and I would ask you to think about that, reflect on that, and perhaps if you have any recommendations or you would like to have a discussion outside of the committee or at the committee, please do that. But apart from that, I note and thank you for the analysis. That was really useful. Thank you, Chris. Okay, moving on, we have the next item on the agenda, which is the Incident Review and Organisation Learning Report. Michelle, you're going to present this, I believe, so take it away. Thank you.
I am. Thank you, Rowan. So this is the quarter two report from the group. Group actually meets on a monthly basis and would have reviewed and confirmed this report to come up to DGNS. So I wasn't necessarily planning to go through all the detail in the report, but there are a couple of things I just wanted to draw out for particular attention, and then happy to take questions. So probably just to for the committee's awareness, we've noted that there are 4 early warning notifications. So this is the notification that we send up to Welsh Government. And I just wanted to provide assurance, perhaps in relation to all 4 of those, that detailed investigations have either been completed or underway in relation to each of those incidents. So the learning from those will come through the Incident Review and Learning Group and be reflected as we move forward. The other point I was just going to pick up, and I'll try and reference because I'm running through quite quickly now. At the end of section 3, we've actually noted there we've seen an increase in the number of reviews. I did have that conversation with the group. I said, is that because we're having more incidents? But I think no was quite reassuring. I think it's because we are trying to broaden our considerations. I think we've discussed this as a committee, so we're reviewing other aspects perhaps of performance delivery in the organisation, which is a positive thing, I think, in terms of certainly in terms of our improvement actions and our learning. And also I wanted to draw out, because I think it's very positive, in section 4.1 you can see the nice little bar charts there and the significant amount of activity that was completed in September. So again, this related to one of those areas. So we've done a bit of a deep dive into our response to major incidents and the management of incidents. Quite a lot of quality improvement actions were identified as a result of that review. And really pleased to see that progress in September. Actually, a lot of those actions have now been taken on board. So we've seen a fair number of improvements in that process. And you can see there's a bit more information about that in section 4.2. So section 4.2 there is covering some of those themes. So this is the sort of wider analysis, a bit broader perhaps than how we've responded to specific incidents or things going wrong. And we've got a bit of analysis there of some of the learning that's come out of those. So you've got the major IT incident one is actually at the top there. And in terms of those improvement actions that have been taken on board in the organisation already. The other one you'll note as we go through that in terms of the themes is the one around workforce behaviours. So I don't know, Rowan, if you want me to just stop and pause for breath at that point, because I do want to talk a little bit more about that one, and we've got the specific report that's been attached for the information of the committee.
Yes, Michelle, I want you to talk about that as well, because I think that's really an important dimension. We can't do anything without people, so people's behaviours are critical. Any comments on what was a really detailed report? Thank you, Michelle. David.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Michelle. Excuse me, bit of a chesty cough. I just wanted to say really well done on clearing the backlog in September. That stood out in the report. I just wanted to commend the team for doing that.
I'll pass that on to the team. Thank you, David. Yes, really good progress, I think. And I think that the upside, obviously, is we'll start to see the impact of those improvements as well, won't we? So we'll have less incidents, hopefully. So it's a win-win, isn't it? So if you're happy then, Rowan, I'll move on to the workforce report. Included this one because I agree it's a very important aspect of the way in which we operate as an organisation, particularly the values. And we've discussed that at the board level. We've discussed it in a number of forums, actually really important to us as an organisation and how we treat the folks who work with us. So this investigation really, or this issue, we were asked to look at in the Incident and Review and Learning Group. There were a couple of prompts, to be honest. We'd had a complaint into the organisation about, it was actually quite a historical issue, but it led to a wider conversation, and I think then the thought that it would be valuable for us to just look at the sense across the organisation about, as I said, how we responded to particular incidents. I think bullying was one of the particular terms that was used, but we kind of talked as a group about inappropriate behaviour, actually, I think, which is a slightly broader definition, and whether we respected one another and we behaved towards one another in the way that we would hope and we would expect. And what you can see from the report is we established a subgroup to have a look at that, and we concluded as a group that actually, you know, we couldn't speak for the organisation as a whole. I think it was mentioned earlier, we've grown very quickly, lots of new people coming in, lots of different perspectives, so we needed to get a sense across the organisation, and we did that through a number of different routes, and those are set out in the report, including through our internal staff surveys. Actually, we asked some specific questions. So I think in summary, and again, the detail is there, I think I felt I was leading that group and took this back to the Incident Review and Learning Group. We've also shared this with the local partnership forum, and we discussed it in our management board. in terms of the conclusions and the recommendations, that whilst the sense was that we didn't have a significant problem in the organisation, there was perhaps less clarity than we would have liked in terms of the actions or the support available to individuals in the event that they felt that there was something that they wanted to raise or that they needed support with. So we've agreed a number of specific recommendations, as I say, which will now be added to our quality improvement action list. And included with that is a sort of a regular sense check as we move forward as an organisation, that we, that we are maintaining those levels of support, and that we are operating, as I said, in line with the values that we've set out for ourselves as an organisation. So specific recommendations around the values, that leadership development program. We've actually had that development program, and we're now establishing, certainly in my directorate, we're having further sessions to take forward some of the messaging and to make sure that we are we all understand, and that we have a common view in terms of the importance of these issues across the organisation. The respect and resolution policy, that's an all Wales policy. There's been a bit of a relaunch happening, and it was an opportunity really for us again to raise the messaging across the organisation and provide some drop-in sessions and support materials to people to encourage people to talk about these kind of issues. The roadmap, as I said, was really about helping people to navigate through. There's quite a lot of support materials available to individuals. It's helping people to understand where they are and how they can get help if they felt they needed it. New starter reviews, really important, as I said, as we grow, lots of people coming into the organisation. And people in OD colleagues particularly have been leading this for us, but our suggestion was that we broadened that out a little bit and had others checking in with new folks to see how they found it in the organisation. Staff surveys, to continue to do those. So we have done that periodically. Actually, we've done it right through the pandemic as well, particularly with people working remotely. So we wanted to continue to do those. And then we said as a group, we felt this was an issue we wanted to revisit as a group. So we wanted to understand that those measures that we put in place were working really, and that we were getting the kind of right level of feedback from across our organisation. But happy to take questions. And a couple of my colleagues, actually, I'm just looking at in front of me, were involved in those conversations as well. So they may want to chip in.
So does anyone have any comments, and particularly would love to hear from colleagues involved in that process? Excellent. I'm going to ask Marilyn and then Julie. Marilyn, you're on mute again.
My mic, sorry. I just want to say a really detailed report. I really enjoyed reading it, and I could see that there's a host of solutions we've got to the initial issue, the problem has been raised. One of the things I wanted to say, and I know that I had some discussions about that we have some statutory training in this area around bullying and such things. But with my EDI lens, I'm just wondering whether there's something we could do as an organisation, because we've got lots of different remedies, but whether we could do something that's situational, that takes a look at all those things together and perhaps looks at alternative ways to do things, like, for instance, having some sessions specifically around the values and the beliefs. Because one of the things that I found in organisations is that there's a really good set of values and norms, but there's a whole issue around people being able, it's being demonstrated, people being able to feel that. So they talks about, people do a lot of talking the talk, but people almost want to see the organisation walk the talk, so do what they say. And so I feel there's a real opportunity for us here at DHCW to perhaps do something like that, that actually talks about actions. And so, as I know, we've got statutory training that people attend, and lots of things like new starters, people who leave, things along the way. But I wonder whether there's a piece of work we could do around this that just challenges about what, one of the things on some of the stats was there was in some areas there was some not known, not sures. So it's about us doing that. And also it was quite a good response from the staff survey, but sometimes I always want to find out about the people who didn't respond, because sometimes that's the information that we get. But you know, really good, and it's really good that we've actually responded to it and we're dealing with it, and we're open in saying that we want some feedback and ways to move it forward. So you know, I think the solutions are really good, and I think that we can only add to them and continue to try to improve in this area.
Yeah, thank you, Marilyn. I'm really happy to carry on that conversation offline as well, because I think it's a really good suggestion. We had a lot of conversation in the leadership session about role modelling, actually, and you're right. We can all talk the talk, can't we? But people will respond to the way that they're treated, aren't they? And the way we all engage as individuals is really important, isn't it? That we demonstrate our values in everything that we do. So I'll follow that up with you if you don't mind.
Yeah,
and looking at running some. I understand it's kind of interactive sessions, maybe some workshopy things, isn't it, to encourage people to talk and perhaps reflect on some of the potential issues would be really helpful. Thank you.
In my other life as a consultant, I recently did a lot of talks with different organisations for Black History Month, and the organisation I delivered the training on behalf, they said they got some excellent feedback, and I think that was because it was almost like an unscripted session in me giving them a lot of information about lived experience that they weren't aware of. So I think that you know, it can go a long way really, and encouraging people who work for the organisation to also champion and say, you know, how good the organisation is as well. So
thank you.
Thanks.
Julie, I'm not going to force you to say that the organisation isn't great if you don't want to, but I'm really interested in hearing from you.
Thank you, Rowan. Yeah, sorry, I wasn't going to add too much, just to say I was part of the subgroup that looked at this, and it was quite encouraging, I think, that when Michelle asked for volunteers, there were quite a large number. So I think people, you know, were very keen to be involved in this bit of work and to seek assurance that there wasn't a significant problem in DHCW. I think we demonstrated that there wasn't, but we did take some learning from it. I think one of the important points I think Michelle did highlight was being sure people knew where to go if they felt they had identified a problem. So I think we'll just continue to monitor this and revisit every so often. But yeah, I think it was a reassuring piece of work from my perspective. Thanks.
That's great to hear, Julie. And I think I'm just going to state, you know, we are going into a difficult winter, not just within the NHS, but I think across the board. And that means people are going to be carrying just more stress, right? Life is going to have some additional challenges. So I think this really important that it's obvious that where people can go to ask for help, to report these kinds of behaviours, because we are one team. And yeah, so I really commend you for doing the work. Having started this type of thing before in organisations, I'm sure other people will have seen this. Doing the first survey tends to be the one that is easier. It's the getting into the rhythm and listening to feedback through the organisation, and the organisation seeing that we're acting on findings. To Marilyn's point, you know, walking the talk. I like that phrase. You know, I think this is a really, really good start. And as usual, I look forward to the organisation improving on it. Thank you for that, Michelle. Are there any more questions before we move on and note that for assurance? No. Thank you, Michelle. Great report. Okay. Let's move on to the standing assurance reports that we receive. Darren, can I ask you to start with our IG assurance report?
Yeah,
Or information governance report. Chairman has to live by the rules as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. As usual, I'll just go through some of the highlighted elements for the committee, and if there's any questions, obviously we'll take questions afterwards in terms of any specific points that have been noted under any particular circumstances. So just some points to note that there is an action on myself in order to and to bring back to the committee in terms of developing an IG strategy, the next iteration basically of the IG strategy. What I've actually taken to doing is actually split component parts of what would be into the strategy, because there's some development work in all of those component parts that I'm putting back into the business in terms of understanding where we go next. So it's trying to, what effectively I'm doing is ensuring that the strategy actually creates what we need to be created and is achievable, not a strategy that is just by name only. So the component parts are being split up as part of the provision of what we do as under the term of the information governance framework. So elements like the Wales Accord for Sharing Personal Information, our NIAS, our National Intelligent Integrated Auditing System, are all separate papers that have come in front of exec directors for some decisions in terms of what we do over the next 3 to 5 to 10 years in these areas, just so that will help to shape the strategy to know whether that is an achievable framework that we're building towards. So that's one point to highlight. And indeed, some of those component parts are actually on later on the agenda, because when we talk about safety on data and patient data, etc., as part of that presentation. So that's one area to note. The other area to note as well, Chair, as you will be aware, we've put a request into Section 255 request, as it's described, Section 255 being one of the sections within the Health and Social Care Act that instructs NHS Digital to commit to, or at least to respond to doing some work on any organisation's behalf in these circumstances, DHCW, and it was allowing work to be done and information to flow in respect of the programme of work around digital services of patients and the public. So that's kind of in the appendices of the report. It just shows that the mechanism to ask NHS Digital to be part of an ongoing programme of work is part of a formal request out of that particular act that is England only. Some other elements. I'm really glad you mentioned the word complexity, Rowan, earlier, because I think one of the things in the report demonstrates the number of data protection impact assessments that we're actually pushing through the sort of the system in some respects, and the level of activity and complexity in them as well. So we continue to meet our obligations under the general data protection regulations by making sure that we do have a robust method of assuring privacy through the analysis of those data protection impact assessments. So there are quite big numbers really, and there's quite a lot of work involved in creating those DPIAs. And so, you know, that hopefully that highlights to the committee the amount of content and the amount of things that we're actually doing within the business. So it's a bit of a litmus test of DPIA to demonstrate exactly how complex and where we are with actually doing the analysis across those programs of work. Not least, we've probably done a fair amount of work and created quite a few data protection impact assessments in support of the cancer programme of work on that consideration about moving off CANISC into the other component parts of the technology that's stack that we have. So we've supported that quite heavily, and there are a number of data protection impact assessments that have actually gone around that supporting the programme. So that's one thing to say. Just quickly then, another element, there is one incident logged within this reporting period. Just to give you some brief detail on it, it was regarding Office 365 and some permissions that we hadn't necessarily anticipated. So as we move through our maturity on 365, we are realising that the guardianship role of how information is being made readily available within the organisation changes slightly in terms of there's more local ownership of when a document should and shouldn't actually be viewable outside of a certain group of individuals or outside of a certain department. So we had one incident where there was slightly more viewing of specific information inside the organisation than there should have been. So all of that's been mitigated now in terms of understanding those, I suppose, those default positions to ensure that documents are appropriate in the right context to the right people, rather than it being more readily available across the organisation. So that was the one incident being referred to, again, just demonstrating some of our compliance against Freedom of Information Act as well, in terms of our responses to the timescales, etc. So I'll leave it there if that's okay, unless anybody's got any questions relative to all of those, any of those items on the report.
David.
Thanks, Rowan. Thanks, Darren, for the update. Really good report. I note and welcome the appointment of a lead information governance for the NDR program, which is really great. Question I had really was how much resource have we got there? My expectation would be, once the platform's been established and we get lots of data added, the demand for usage of that will grow quite a bit, both from within our organisation and from the wider NHS. So have we taken a view on whether we've got the resource there to cover the next sort of 18 months, or have you taken a long-term view of the demand?
Thanks, David. That's a really good question. We've taken a long-term view on this. So initially we've got resources in. So it's we've got two whole-time equivalents newly into that space, and then for some of the existing staff resource within the wider team are part of the support mechanism, including myself actually. So we're part of that. So the initial phase is to understand what we need to do to pump prime all of those governance arrangements within the NDR space. Now, this is some of the observational work that was done as part of that Gartner review that came in and kind of did a bit of a risk analysis on what is required from an IG information governance perspective to support the programme. So initially we've got resources, we will have resources and have resources in now in order to understand how we knit those elements together to make sure we've got a robust process in place. Longer term, we might need more, depending on demand and depending on complexity of some of those things that we get both from two sides essentially. Those that want to ingest information into the NDR and those that want to take information out of the NDR for whatever different purposes and different projects, programs, research, all of those type of things. So there's a building requirement, I think, David, and depending on that build. What we don't want to do is put too much resource into it soon, because it's wastage, and not least information governance professionals are quite difficult to get hold of these days, to be perfectly honest. So we've got to be quite careful on how we try and build those things.
Great, thanks, Dan. That sounds like an eminently sensible plan, so thanks for the clarification.
Any other comments? No, Darren, thank you as usual. Excellent plan, and you know, I think it's a fast-moving area. So I don't know whether the relationships we have with sort of the wider Welsh universities or other apprentice schemes might be a route to developing some young and, or not necessarily young, but early talent in information governance that will step up as demand steps up. Certainly a critical area for us. So thank you, Darren. And next, can I invite Rydian to talk us through the informatics assurance report, please?
Thank you very much. This is agenda item 3.42. And first of all, I should say thanks to Lydia for the preparation of this document. Paul is on leave, so I'll take you through it. The Welsh Informatics Assurance Group process is there to support quality and safety, and provides relevant assurance for new and changed developments. The appendices A and B are quite useful in terms of outlining the assurance quality plans and the areas of assurance that are covered during the assessment of a programme. Table 3 highlights work that's been done in the time period specified, mainly green or amber, no reds, which is reassuring. It also, the report, which is 12 pages, quite a long report, which reflects how much work's been done by the team. I don't have anything to add to the report, and the report has been submitted for noting by the committee.
Thank you, Idian. And you know, it's a long report, but as you say, there's an awful lot of work that is ongoing. So thank the team as well for the work that they do, please. Does anyone have any questions for Idian? No? Oh, one, David.
Yeah, thanks, Rydian. In the table, when it's talking about Canis, it says there's no confirmed go live date. I think we have a target. Am I confusing what's in the report with the actual go live of phase 1?
This report went up to the end of September.
Oh,
Go-live
okay.
was approved by the Velindre board this month.
Okay.
So it's a reflection of the work done during that time period.
Fine.
So it's
Okay.
a little bit behind to what you actually know is going on, David.
Fine. Okay, that's okay. Thanks for the clarification.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for the report, because I think these reports have become very, very clear in terms of the work that you're assuring the committee of. So thank you for that. Moving on to 3.4.3, Andrew, could I ask you to present the Information Services Assurance Report, please?
Yes, certainly. Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to sort of pick up a few points that are mentioned in the report, some of which have been around for a little while. So, you know, things have moved forwards quite well, certainly on the development on 3.1 on the report of the it's an automated tool we're writing using Power Apps, and this has already been developed to automate the monthly report outs that we have with our progress against IMTP and annual plan deliverables, which before was somebody gathering data and putting into a slide deck and etc. So we've managed to do the first step of that, and that is now operational. And it allows us or Rachel to easily look at and report out on various things that I do apologize, my camera wasn't on then, but I'll just go back to that. It allows Rachel to see what the current statuses are of certain deliverables very, very readily. The next phase of the tool is the new work requests that come flying into ISD. At the moment, there are multiple mailboxes run by different teams, and we find that quite difficult to maintain and handle. So what we're doing is putting those through into one channel that is this tool as described, which provides an auto response to the requester in the form of an e-form, which prompts them to fill out some basic information about what their request might be, which enables us to triage that a lot quicker. And we're building in mechanisms within the tool to enable where we feel at that triage point there is an inclusion of NDR, or it is totally NDR, because we do get some requests through that door as well, into their tool. I think it's called Panel, that we can then work more collaboratively on that particular request. As a follow-up to that, we have the additional joint meetings with NDR. We've called it the operational group. That meets on a monthly basis, and we would then review those work requests and look at the prioritization around that and whether there's an interim solution pending a longer term solution being delivered by the NDR. On the ISD assurance group, we have quite a busy month through August, September time and into October, but everything that goes through the Welsh Informatics Assurance Group that has an information services flavour to it will come through the ISDAG, the assurance group, for consideration and further work there. We have previously reported about the service catalogue, service portfolio, that is slightly out of date, let's just put it like that. There were a number of services that were stood up as a result of COVID that needed adding to that. We've had a service management person working with us for the last 12 months who's made some excellent progress on those particular items that were paramount to the delivery of the information services side of the COVID response. Those are now fully integrated into the catalogue and the portfolio, and that is working really well. However, we have decided that we would like to take the opportunity to refresh the remaining services on the portfolio and bring them up to date and recategorize them, I think is what we're establishing here to try and achieve, because some of them have moved on in recent times. Unfortunately, we've now lost the 12-month comment due to the fixed term agreement coming to an end. So we're in the process of drafting a document for the management board that sets out both the current position with those services that need refreshing and what the implications of not doing that are. We move on to the role of DHCW as a statutory body, and that goes with that the official stats publishing role that we now have. We have been doing that pre-becoming DHCW. We used to do it as part of NWIS for certain things, and what we are looking to do here is to go beyond that and provide further information to both patients, public, Welsh Government, whoever it might be. And we're putting together an options paper that says what is the art of the possible here, what is the appetite from the management board and the exec board to how far do they want to take that. So that will be coming in the next couple of months. We've already touched on today the internal audit of the switching service carried out by the Shared Services Partnership. You're correct, Chair. Rachel and I have both had eyes on that, and I have drafted a management response that has sort of there's no surprises in there. Let me just give that assurance. And I think it just reiterates what we originally thought and set out in the S-bar that we took to this committee earlier in the year. There is some areas that will need addressing, and we were putting that response together in the next week when Rachel comes back next Wednesday. So that'll be ready for her there. The corporate Power BI team have drafted some documentation around an assurance framework for the publication of dashboards, using Power BI within the DHCW corporate arena. This really is to assure ourselves as an organisation that we aren't publishing anything that we wouldn't want published or accessed to the outside world, whatever that world might be. Power BI is a very powerful tool, and if we aren't careful, then we could allow unintentionally by various drill downs that could be put in an element of exposure to something we wouldn't want exposing. So this framework puts in that assurance level that doesn't allow, in the nicest possible way, anybody to publish anything before it's been thoroughly checked and approved for publication. So that's, I think it's been through its first draft, first reading. Rachel is happy with the contents of that. So now looking to the next stage to take that into operation. So There are a couple of risks just to bring to your attention, one of which we've already spoken about, the switching service. And the second one on there is around the service management one, which is still a risk due to, as just reported, we have some outstanding work to complete on that. So that is the information services report. If there are any questions, I'm more than happy to take them.
David?
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Andrew, for the report. Could you just expand a little bit on the last point you made about the service management resource? How big an issue is that for us, and what's the nature of the risk?
I think the nature of the risk, David, is more around misalignment of reporting on various elements that are out of date for information services through the IOPR report, more than they're not frontline services, needless to say. They're more around a description of more of a function that is carried out on a day-to-day basis by information services, as opposed to a service that is provided, such as the data warehouse or anything like that. We're confident that those services that have that exposure are described correctly on the service catalogue. I suppose that the risk is internal to us. We are being asked for information around services that back up plans for the publishing service and such like. It's more of a let's just get it all in line. So what we are doing, we have had 2 members of information services go through some vital foundation training to support that work going forwards, but without sort of preempting the report we're putting together, it's more around we would look to the service management team to provide us with some subject matter expert guidance to enable us to complete the task.
Okay, thanks for the clarification.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you for your report. That was really useful, and more or less brings us perfectly on time for a comfort break. So well done, everybody, on that. Michelle, do you have a question?
I'm not going to stand in the way of the break, honestly, Rowan. I was just going to ask, with your permission, I'd like to ask David Sheard to join the group after the break.
Of course.
He's going to provide the update on the programme portfolio for us, if that's okay.
That would be fantastic. No problem at all. Thank you for that, Michelle. I'll see everyone back at past, I think. Thank you. Thank you for returning promptly, everyone. I think we're almost all back. I'm just giving everyone the last couple of moments. Hopefully you had a moment of brain food and a biscuit in readiness for part 2 of the committee meeting. Okay, we're now moving on to the digital programme overview, an update. Since we last met, David and I were able to meet with Rebecca Cook, who is responsible for the NDR programme, and with Ivan Evans. And I think that was, Chris, I think you attended as well, and I think that was a really positive session and provided a lot of clarity and reassurance where we are with that programme. So thank you very much for organising that, and so that was something we might do again in future if there is an element of IM confusion. Thank you for that. And with that, I'm going to welcome David to the committee meeting and invite him to take us through the overview update work that has been going on. And David, if I can try and get us back on time, I think we've got until 3 o'clock, I think, for this part of the committee. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is David Sheard. I'm Assistant Director of Service Transformation for DHCW. So I'm going to go through section 3.5 of the papers, the project portfolio overview. What I was planning to do, if that suits, is just pick out There are 4 things highlighted in the cover sheet, so I'll talk about those and then I'll just quickly run through the remainder with some important stuff that I think you'll be interested in. So in the paper, the only project that is red is WEDS, the Welsh Emergency Department System. The principal issue here being that we are live with WEDS in 1 hospital, Neath Talbot, and we've been live since December last year, so we're coming up to nearly 11 months now. And there's still a lack of confidence in the system from the users and from the digital team in Swansea Bay, to the extent that they're not willing to recommend to their colleagues in Morriston, which is a far bigger, well, it's a type 1 emergency department. They're not willing to recommend that they take WEDS as it stands at the moment. So this is a position that has been escalated within the project. We had a meeting in October with the chief executive of the supplier, and we await a proposal coming back from them about how we move from the position we're in where we're stuck, because unless Morriston takes it, no one else is going to take it either. The next one on the list was the National Data Resource. So hopefully I'm not saying anything here that Rebecca didn't tell you earlier. So this was green, it's now gone to amber, mainly around resourcing of the support teams required to support the data platform and the API management tooling. So without those resources, we can't put this into production in effect, because we don't have a viable support team to look after it. There was positive news on the NDR in that we have released the first 4 APIs that have been in development onto the API management tool. So those 4 were released, and they're available in the development environment now for health boards to develop against if they wish to. But as I said, we don't yet have the support team in place that could support that into a production environment. The next one was the Welsh Information System for Diabetes Management, WISDOM. This has gone from green to amber. The issue that's caused that is the paediatric assessment form. We had an issue within the test environment that meant it couldn't be tested to timetable, to do with access to that element of the development in the test environment. We have got around that now, but that has delayed its release, and it's going to push the release of that form back until the new year before it can go out. And then finally, on the final page, there are 2 new projects that have been added into this overview following feedback from various boards. So we've added in a project called Powys England Cross Border, which is funded by the Digital Priority Investment Fund. The funding goes to Powys, and then we're in effect the subcontractor, if you like, to Powys. And this is about trying to improve flows of patient data, such that I think it's more than 50% of the acute care provided to Powys patients is provided by England or hospitals just over the border in England, and it's trying to integrate that flow or trying to get a flows of information back into our architecture for those patients, but also it's looking at the other way. So if you're a Powys patient and you turn up in Shrewsbury, then it would be helpful if the clinician treating you could have the same sorts of information available as if you turned up in an NHS Wales hospital. And then the final one that's been added is LINC, which stands for Laboratory Information Network Cymru, if I get that one straight. That always trips me up. So this is the new pathology laboratory system. And that's a program that historically has been run by the NHS Wales Collaborative. It is coming over to DHCW. In fact, it may have just come over. to DHCW along with the radiology program as well, and that's to do with the reconfiguration of or the configuration of the NHS Wales Executive and NHS Wales Collaborative forming part of that, but not the digital programs. So that's why those two have come on into the report. Michelle.
Sorry, just really quickly for clarity, David, because it is moving quite quickly, isn't it? And I think board member colleagues will be aware the board agreed the transfer last week, I think it was, in an extraordinary board meeting. So 1st of January is when the programmes will actually transfer, and the teams, we're very pleased that the teams will be transferring as well into our organisation. But we've got it's a few weeks before the transfer actually takes place.
Thank you. So I'm going to now quickly look at the dashboard. So there are 5 slides there. So on the first slide, I've already spoken a little bit about the NDR. The one I was going to make note of was the Cancer Informatics Program. So I think everyone will be aware we've got a really key implementation, not this weekend, but next weekend into Velindre Cancer Centre. And the good news on that is that there was a dress rehearsal 2 weekends ago where we put Canisc into read-only mode and worked through the implementation plan, and that went really, really well, better than I think we thought it would. So we are still on track for that big go live next weekend, Cancer. If we move down to the second of the 5 slides, digital services to patient and the public, we are in private beta now with DSBP, which is really significant. It's with a sample cohort of patients from 10 practices across Wales. That started a couple of weeks ago. So that's the first tangible thing going out of the door from DSPP in that respect. So that's clearly a big milestone there. There's a big symposium coming up later in November, talking about the plans beyond private beta and when it becomes public, etc. Test, trace, protect at the bottom of that second slide there. As we've spoken about before, there's a big concentration of effort around the autumn booster campaign. And then we're looking at the plans to transition this into service, so to speak, as it becomes, as hopefully COVID becomes business as usual. Generally, it will as well for ourselves in DHCW. The third slide, there's a couple I was going to pick out here. So GP systems framework, the developments and that we are talking about here. So in the RAG reason, it says supply delays for new developments. This is to do with a third supplier on the contract. So we've introduced a third supplier, but in order for them to be operational within Wales, we need them to be able to integrate into the national architecture in the way that the existing 2 suppliers do as well. Community care, WCCIS, which is the one below. A lot of interest in that last week, obviously. The positive news coming out of WCCIS recently was that we've begun a pilot in BCU. So that's the first implementation in BCU. That's in Ynys Môn, and so far that seems to be going okay. Of the local authorities in BCU, I think it's 3 or 4 of them are on board as well. So there is some positive news coming out of WCCIS in that respect. WEDs I've already spoken about, so I will move on to the 4th slide. The first one is WICIS, which is the intensive care system. We've got a problem at the moment that we're working hard to resolve around the integration of lab data into WICIS. So we're trying to take a feed of specific types of tests and test profiles and present them within the WICIS solution. So there is a delay there because of that, but the team are working with colleagues from pathology and the clinical lead for WICIS to try and resolve that. Radiology, as I think I just mentioned, that's coming over alongside Link from the 1st of January. We are involved in the procurement project there, and the dialogue, the competitive dialogue process is coming towards an end. So that will end in December, and we'll then go into a business case, into the business case writing process. Medicines management, significant progress here that we have published the EPMA framework. Again, that would have gone to the SHA board, wouldn't it? But there are 3 suppliers on there. So there's Better, Careflow, who are the pharmacy hospital pharmacy stock control system supplier, and a company called Nerve Center. And then finally on the 5th slide, I think, well, I've spoken about both of those already, haven't I? Powys, it's about getting data across the border in a systematic way, and Link we will take on from the 1st of Jan. Okay, happy to take any questions.
Thank you, David, for running through those. I'm going to invite questions and comments. Can I start with you, David, please?
Yep, thanks, Chair. Thanks for the update, David. Couple of questions, if I may. So, starting with the last thing you just mentioned there, the Powys cross-border project. One of the things that comes up frequently at the independent member digital network is the interaction between England and Wales, and particularly the colleague from Betsy. So is the solution that we're building for Powys, would that have applicability to the Betsy health board as well as the Powys health board? First question. I've got a couple of others, if I may, after that.
Yeah, of course. So potentially, yes. The solution is not identified yet, but we, in parallel with this work, we've been working with the 4 integrated care systems on the other side of the border. So obviously it starts with BCU at the top and comes all the way down. And the way that NHS England is developing its ICSs, as they call them, that they're bringing together lots of clinical information into one system in a similar way that we have already done with WCP. But they haven't yet worked out how they're going to transfer data between the ICSs, because wherever you draw the border, someone's going to have one foot on either side of it, haven't they? So we've done some preliminary work, or we've been party to some preliminary work there, which is setting about a direction of travel, about how we could use a standards-based approach to do this across the whole of the border, and not just that border, but potentially into the rest of the UK, by agreeing a mechanism of a mechanism for sending a standardized patient summary to the receiving systems. I can see Reader's got his hand up there. He probably wants to come in on that point. Is that right?
Thank you, David. It's more complex than it would seem on the grounds that each organisation across the border has a particular way of doing it, and indeed there are hospitals within each of those regions that behave differently in terms of their informatic programs. So what we propose to do is to conform to the International Patient Record standards, so that we'd have 2 opportunities there. One for, hopefully, for a patient to take their record wherever they go, through the Digital Services and Public Patients, and secondly, for us to essentially develop an outgoing plug, which 1, 2, 3, or all 4 of the organisations that border Wales will have an opportunity to plug into. That will require work on their behalf. That's outside of our control.
Yeah. Okay.
But it should also, a lot of tertiary care happens, and it's not just over the border. It could be in London or Birmingham, etc. And that would provide a solution to those scenarios.
The other thing The other thing to note is, of course, the difference between acute pathways and scheduled care and elective pathways. So an elective pathway, when you've got the time, because we negotiated with NHS England that our web services in terms of our email are secure like theirs, we now can exchange personal identifiable information to and from using the nhs.net facility in England. Again, unfortunately, not all NHS England hospitals subscribe to that.
Okay. Right.
I'm just going to spell out for you the sort of underlying message here, that one of the advantages of having a national standardised architecture is that we don't have some of the issues that befuddle the NHS in England, which is a series of regional choices which are not nationally consistent. And I guess we have to recognise that.
We have to lead the way, Rowan.
I have to say, open standards all the way. Okay.
I did
sorry,
have
David, you had another question.
I did. Well, I've got an observation. I'll do that one first. So the issue on NDR, which has taken it amber, around the specialist resource for platform support. I know from painful experience in a previous life that getting the right skills to do that type of task is somewhat challenging because they're in demand and command a premium, basically. So are we looking to recruit, or are we looking to try and upskill some of our existing staff to take on the role? It is sort of an observation and a bit of a question as well. But if you can't answer that, David, then feel free to take a pass on that.
I'll take a pass unless anyone else knows. I was gonna hazard a guess, but I'll take a pass.
Yeah, that's fine. I'll pick it up with Rebecca. And then the last thing, could you say a little bit more about WEDS? From what you said, we've got basically a supplier that has delivered something that the hospital isn't particularly happy with. There's a gap between what they want and what's been provided. There's a hint that we've sort of escalated it. Can you just sort of expand a little bit on how big is the gap? Are we talking about some minor or is there some fundamental things that the hospital has flagged up that doesn't work for them? It's going to require quite a lot of remedial work.
Well, there's some commercial sensitivity which I'm going to be mindful of as we're in a public meeting. It's not the functionality of the application that's the issue. It's the way that the application is delivered to the desktop, and it's being delivered because this is the contractual obligation. It's being delivered in a way that the supplier doesn't deliver it in any other deployments in England or Wales. So we think that's the root cause, and that's what we're investigating.
Okay. All right. Thanks for the clarification.
Okay. Carwyn? You're on mute, Carwyn.
Sorry, I'm just going to add just a little bit of information to that. So normally the system is hosted in hospital, you know, it's for one hospital environment. And because this is being done for Wales, if you like, and hosted nationally, they're having to use a different technology to make that application available to the people. And that's seemingly where the problem lies.
Okay, thanks, Carwyn.
Can I just ask, is there a sort of timescale for resolving that issue? Has that been set as we've escalated? Do we have any expectation of when the WEDS system might move back into amber?
Well, at the moment we're awaiting a proposal from the supplier. They are doing some due diligence, and they need a bit of help from ourselves actually at the moment in terms of some of the connectivity into the. So as Carwyn's just explained, at the moment it's hosted within the data center, and the systems they integrate with are in the data center. So if we change that model, then they're doing a bit of diligence about how they would integrate by changing that model. We then need to see what comes back and understand the commercial and legal implications of that.
Excellent. And do we have resources to support that in a timely way? Because it's another thing for us to.
It is another thing. We haven't got them this week, which is why I'm being a little bit hesitant. So we don't have full-time resources on this because it's just taken for so long. But we'll be working with them next week, and I would expect them to turn it around quite quickly after that, them being the supplier.
That's good, because it's when situations are like this that relationships, are everything. So thank you for that, David, and appreciate the commercial sensitivities of the discussion. I think that's a useful conversation. Did anyone have any other comments on the programme? No, I think Michelle, again, David, thank you for that the report. It's a really useful way of visualising the whole portfolio, and thank you for that. That's great. Okay.
Thank you.
Can I move on then to 3.6, Darren? We've got a session here on keeping patient data safe, which I think is a really important. Just to start to lay out what we're doing, particularly with all of the other progress and discussions around, as I said, changing policy at national, UK level, and the continuing interest in this area.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The slide pack is in the papers, but if you'll bear with me for 2 seconds, hopefully I'll just get the slides up in a more presentable way than just in the pack. So bear with me, because I'm dialed in on the other screen as well. So hopefully we won't have too much disruption, and I'll pull the right presentation up.
That sounded like you're running stereo there, David. Darren, do you have Dolby as well?
Not quite. Okay. And I can see that everybody can see that, because I can see both screens. Bear with me, I'll just go into presentation. Okay, great. Thank you for allowing me to just present a few of the aspects in terms of keeping patient information safe. I'll run through a few of the slides in relation to this, but just to say on the outset, this is possibly clarifying in terms of where we are as an organisation on contributing on an all Wales basis to keeping information safe. It isn't just us meeting our own obligations; it's helping other organisations to meet their obligations as well. So obviously that's part and parcel of what DHCW does on a daily basis on quite a number of different fronts, let's face it. But essentially what it means is that our responsibility is to help to create a framework that makes sure that in all circumstances, as patient moves around this complex system, and again I've used that word complex, like a complex system of cogs and wheels, that it's done in a safe and compliant manner with GDPR, etc., both from a direct care perspective and an indirect care perspective. And it's also enveloping not just the NHS, it's enveloping health, social care, and in some circumstances, public services as well. So in terms of some of the framework elements that we are. So we've got quite a depth in terms of that responsibility across some of those frameworks that I'm about to discuss. Some of the concepts in the slide come from our previous strategy, and so I would expect some of the wording, or certainly some of the narrative around some of what's in the slides, will actually change a little bit as part of that strategic refresh that we spoke about earlier. So we described in our previous strategy around some of the things that we're doing, and this isn't an absolute everything within those particular items on the list. So it's not exhaustive. There's lots of elements, but we kind of try to put it in a way that kind of step change where we are with our external responsibilities, then our internal responsibilities through the sides of our full depth of our skills and our knowledge. So you'll see that in terms of the top layer, we've got things that we obviously have an influence on and that we have relationships with in terms of other stakeholders and other things at the national level. We spoke about data promise today, so that's not unusual. We shouldn't see that on the top layer, but we might find that data promise element could actually be framed within the top and the middle of some of those aspects as well. So some of these could move around as well. So they may actually, you could argue that they could actually be in two boxes at the same time in some respects. The one thing that we really do hold really very close, and I think does actually benefit us within DHCW and the rest of our kind of the community that we serve, is our relationship with the Commissioner. So with the Information Commissioner's Office, we do everything in full sight of the ICO and have the Information Commissioner's Office and have partnership working with the ICO in order to support everything that we do. And I think that's really, really important. Together with Welsh Government, of course, and together in full sight of the likes of Audit Wales, those type of things. So we do have a lot of partnership approaches that we take from those commissioners or those that provide that scrutiny for us to make sure that we are, one, heading in the right direction from a compliance perspective, and two, that we are observing the right things, and we are not let's just say we're not creating difficult situations for ourselves and inadvertently for the rest of our customer base, I suppose. So that they're just some elements. The cross-border reference is not necessarily, we've just had discussions about cross-border. It's more about observing and having partnership working with the likes of NHS Digital, for instance, and also with Scotland, Northern Ireland, and the home nations, and in some respects, looking at our European partners as well in terms of those borders. So the border is much wider than that. So I'm going to concentrate on the middle bit, essentially, in terms of what we do around some of those very large programs of work that are part of the framework, and indeed our frameworks themselves. So part of the narrative they're going to change in the strategy is about the fact that I think aspects like the Wales Accord for Sharing Personal Information is a kind of a framework in its own right, same as some of the other items. So what you will see in the next iteration of the strategy is a slightly different change on the narrative in terms of what we're describing as a framework. So all of those are essentially a lot of the component parts that we have some layer of responsibility or definitely have a seat around the table when there's conversations going on in terms of how we approach information governance across health and social care and, say, public services. So I'll come on to WASPI, so the Wales Accord for Sharing Personal Information. This is, I believe, 15 years old now, or somewhere to that measure. So this was born out of the need to have a framework that encourages organisations to understand their responsibilities when they're sharing data, and have a framework that puts some assurance both within those organisations and demonstrably to the public about how information might be shared under certain circumstances. This has led to quite a significant amount of activity actually for WASPI over the years, in terms of the fact that it's supported the types of conversations that need to be had in certain policy areas. A lot of WASPI has actually made huge strides and huge advances into things like adult and children protection and child protection, and again across public services. So things like Flying Start, aspects of Team Around the Family, other aspects where information sharing was required as either part of a new programme of work or a new policy, but there needed to be that wrap of what does good information sharing look like and what does safe information sharing look like. So WASPI has come into quite a front and centre analysis in terms of what we want to do with what we needed to do, I suppose. More recently, of course, WASPI was used. as part of the pandemic response and the test, trace and protect response as well. We used WASPI in order to frame our arrangements with 22 local authorities, 7 health boards, 3 trusts, and all of the special health authorities that come with that as well, as part of that global agreement in order to share data in terms of responding back to the pandemic. Now, of course, the provisions are there in regulation for us to do that, but we still needed to form the agreement around all of those different data controllers in order to ensure that that critical information was shared routinely and minute by minute with all of those different organisations in order to respond to the pandemic, certainly in the trace and protect area across a lot of the 22 local authorities, as you know, because the health kind of the input from the local authorities was key as part of that testing process, and that was a different context by which we did that within Wales as opposed to a centralised type of support mechanism happened in England. So WASPI has had a big impact in some of those areas by creating that framework so organisations could utilise it. Very much so that it's moved on. WASPI actually helps to form what are assurance groups across Wales that actually look at what's described as information sharing protocols, and there's a method then of actually assuring those protocols and accepting those protocols as correct and forming forming a framework and forming the right thing to do across a lot of the portfolios of work. So we've been having, over the years, we've had conversations, like I say, extended to public services. So we've had fire, police, the local authorities under different circumstances, not just within their health and social care responsibilities, and many other stakeholders actually to form what might need to happen from an information sharing perspective. So it's had a big impact actually, and it's supported by Welsh Government to a certain extent, but I'll come on to the bit where we need to re-emphasise some of the things that WASPI can do and is doing, and to move it to the next level, in our opinion, in terms of how we do those things. So it's a bit of a 5-year iteration, I suppose. We find that every 5 years we need to pick WASPI up and we need to do something else with it and re-engage the service in terms of what it can do in order to help information sharing in a safe and effective manner. So that's WASPI, but we'll come back to some of the elements on that. We've got NIAS, our National Intelligent Integrated Auditing Solution, and again, I made reference to this previously. This is kind of our framework for access. So, as individuals may or may not know, we have this piece of technology that sits on quite a significant amount of our core products that help organisations and help organisations to keep that information safe and secure within those particular environments, and to ensure that the employees of those organisations are acting appropriately with that information. So in terms of NIAS, then of course, when we've got the likes of the Welsh Critical Portal that can give access to all Welsh citizens' records across the geographical spread of Wales, then we need tools that will ensure that we are keeping that information safe and secure, and employees are acting appropriately with that access that they're provided. Previously, of course, information was being and to a certain extent still is in some areas, was being held within that geographical location of those health boards and those trusts, and we needed to open up all of that so that there was more ubiquitous access to all of that information. So as Welsh citizens moved porously through the borders, that information was made available. So NIAS was one of the prerequisites of opening up the kind of the access to a lot of the data that we now see resides within the likes of Welsh Critical Portal and some of the bigger systems. So NIAS continues the story as well. So we've had NIAS for the best part of 7 or 8 years. We're looking now in terms of how we move forward with NIAS, just as on a kind of a reprocurement from a reprocurement perspective, but not necessarily yet. we're understanding what that means in terms of how our own architecture is changing and how we might be able to do something like a proactive monitoring tool like this is how we can actually do that, and we can better serve the needs of those systems and those services, because NIAS is quite a complex web of connections and audit fragments and understanding users and understanding patients in order for NIAS to come up with a set of notifications that allow health boards, trusts and other organisations to identify if employees are taking, are using that data in a non-legitimate way that is commensurate with their job roles and responsibilities. So NIAS is a really important tool from our perspective, and something that has been supported by DHCW since its inception 7 or 8 years ago. Another aspect of that we are responsible for, and is very important from my perspective, is GDPR raised the profile on having data protection resources within every single organisation, data control and data controller. So we quickly came to realise that some of those that were providing NHS services just didn't have the capacity or the skills or the knowledge to actually go it alone in some respects by having a robust data protection officer function within those organisations, and GPs were one of them. So whilst we pushed that question, got pushed around the service a lot in terms of who's going to support primary care through some of the DPO requirements, it kind of fell to us to see if we could work that through and see if we could support that. So we have 84.77% of all GP practices in Wales subscribe to the service, and it is a subscription. So it means that we get a small nominal amount from each GP practice, 84% of those GP practices, in order to fund the service. And we provide a lot of support, as it says on those slides, in terms of how we can actually support them through, one, understanding their responsibilities, but also being able to advise and guide when they have difficult situations that they have to contend with when it comes to patient data. And we're finding that the maturity of those practices is actually increasing as a result of us having this service. And we're actually getting more complex queries coming through, which actually shows that there's a maturity of those practices in some respects. Things like access to the data, access to individual patients wanting access to data that's held about them, and particularly complex matters when there's child issues to contend with as well, and parental responsibilities wanting access to children data, etc., etc. So we're starting to get some pretty meaty queries coming through that mean we have to deep dive into legislation and deep dive into standards and all of those type of things to understand how we provide robust advice back to the practices. And I think we do have a lot of good feedback from those practices that support the fact that we take that responsibility from them, and they're very happy with it. The reason we've only got 84.77% of GP practices is because some practices are health board managed, and so the data protection resource comes directly from those health boards, and some GP practices actually have outsourced that responsibility to a private company. So that's why there's 84.77% and not 100% fulfilling. I suppose we're fulfilling their responsibilities. But we do have the majority, of course, under those circumstances. And then what we do provide is specific tooling for those GPs based on the fact that there's a subscription service, so not everybody gets that. Only 84% of those practices actually get some of that tooling, which help them to actually do the day-to-day running of a sort of a data protection responsibility. The other big thing, again, this is kind of our IG. This is our framework for assurance. Is we've got something called the Information Governance Toolkit, and again, all mechanisms in order to demonstrate how we're keeping patient data safe. So that allows organisations to measure themselves, particularly at the moment it's primary care, health boards, trusts and special health authorities, to measure themselves against a series of compliance requirements on how they can actually assess themselves and demonstrate how robust they are in particular areas of information governance. That could be information security elements. There's going to be elements of things like records management, how they respond into GDPR in terms of making information available to the public, business continuity arrangements to a certain extent, not necessarily moving into that kind of security and cybersecurity element, but more from a kind of more from a sort of business resilience perspective, I suppose. So the toolkit. So there's a toolkit. It's based on a bit of a platform as well that we've used, and that was previously we've kind of reused some of the technology that we've already had in the organisation in order to establish a platform to allow organisations to kind of do the ticks in the box and answer the questions relative to the toolkit's requirements. For the first time, actually, GPs themselves have to fill this in. Each individual GP fills this in. And for the first time, we've had 100% compliance where every single GP has actually completed the toolkit within Wales. So that's quite an achievement, because sometimes, you know, we're fully aware of GPs' responsibilities in other areas and GP surgery's responsibilities. So sometimes a toolkit isn't necessarily seen as an important part of what they do. But I think together with the DPO service, it's just putting that emphasis on how their responsibilities are just as important as everybody else's in order to keep patient data safe, etc. And certainly into primary care, as we expand certain services within primary care, then I think it's important that they can demonstrate how much value and how much value they put on making sure that that information is safe, secure, and under those circumstances. I'll come on to it, but there's many other areas the toolkit should and needs to go. But this is about understanding where our priorities are next and how the kind of the framework can envelop other organisations or other responsible bodies that are delivering NHS and social care services. Some of the things that we also have, which is to kind of helps again under that framing of keeping data safe, is something that we call the Welsh Control Standard for Electronic Health and Care Records. So this is again a bit of a framework that kind of just points organisations to understanding their full responsibilities when it's about sharing electronic information for direct care purposes. So those things like organisations should have robust arrangements in to understand access to the data, and then understand what the responsibilities are in terms of onboarding and offboarding users onto the systems. Another one is about organisations knowing their responsibility when it comes to auditing, for instance, and NIAS comes into the frame on that, and understanding their responsibilities for a number of other key component parts when it comes to actually having access and sharing data around our electronic systems on our services. So the control standards there in order to pin that responsibility, I suppose, in a way that's a bit like an accord in some respects. So these are all, again, tooling and mechanisms that we use in order to create that environment, that safe but shareable environment of patient information and client information. I mentioned it earlier. The one thing that, again, that we are responsible internally for is to make sure that data protection impact assessments are created for everything that we do in terms of new systems, new services, and refreshing those systems and services as well. So this is a big mainstay for us. So via our assurance process, as Rydian referred to earlier, we make sure that DPIAs are created when needed so that we can reflect any risks and those mitigations around input, having new ways of sharing that data electronically under different environments. So the DPI process for us is really important. We also allow other organisations to share our templates that we use as well for that sort of DPIA process as well. And indeed, some organisations have modelled their own data protection impact assessment process around ours, because we shared all of that information with them. So we've got a kind of a community of practice that kind of sees the same way of doing things as ourselves. Incidents and breaches, we are always very transparent around those things, and we need to be transparent in that frame of kind of protecting patient data. We're aware of I suppose the Commissioner's responsibilities when it comes to investigating any incidents, those type of things. I'm pleased to say that DHCW itself as an organisation hasn't necessarily been under that difficult conversation with the ICO, mainly because, again, in terms of what I've said, that partnership approach with the ICO is the fact that they help us to actually understand what our responsibilities at the very start of a process, rather than at the end of a process when things may or may go wrong because we've unknowingly or unwittingly created a potential issue, and data becomes, you know, I suppose, unsafe in terms of usage and sharing and those type of things. So we use, again, a full flurry of tooling in order to, one, to make staff aware of their responsibilities, and then to report incidents, etc. as well, should we have any under certain circumstances. But relatively speaking, we have low-level incidents that are, I suppose, part and parcel of an organisation of our size kind of responsibilities. In some respects, for an organisation like ourselves, who has significant responsibilities for information, patient information and client information, then we do, you know, we have to be as tight as possible on in these areas, and certainly around that staff training and that awareness. And we are very hot on ensuring that all our staff have statutory and mandatory training and specialist training as well when required, and training and induction around their information governance responsibilities. So from a DHCW responsibility, we are very keen, or we're very careful to ensure that everybody's aware of their responsibilities, because the majority of our staff, their patient data will pass across their hands in some shape or form. So we have to be very tight on that. And again, we have to demonstrate that to other organisations and provide them some of that tooling in order to understand what their responsibilities are around incident breach reporting and staff responsibilities as well. So the other aspect as well is that in terms of that transparency are aspects where, again, we've reported on it, things like Subject Access Requests and Freedom of Information Act. So in order to convey that message of security and what we do with the data, then essentially we're subject to the same type of regulations through the GDPR and the Freedom of Information Act. So we make information readily available to members of the public, either through access because they require access to information held about them themselves, or because they want to know a bit more information about the organisation. And so they are kind of things that we use in order to create that kind of that form of transparency within the organisation. And there are many other different ways that we do that. But certainly from a Freedom of Information Act perspective, again, our compliance with that is really, really important, because it helps us to publicly, I suppose, to show publicly exactly what we're doing on a day-to-day basis with public money. We've spoke about the data promise. There's possibly not a huge amount more to say than that, other than the fact that we've supported that. We've supported that in a number of different ways. We are heavily invested in that for a number of different reasons. There are programs that are heavily invested on the data promise. Aspects like the National Data Resource are heavily invested on some of the outcomes from the data promise, because this is about being transparent on how data is being used. And as you probably be aware, that we've got one of our senior members of staff in the IG team actually seconded into Welsh Government to help move that forwards as fast as possible and as complementary as possible, so that data promise work and programme of work actually moves forward. And again, under a number of different circumstances, DHCW are heavily invested and are keen to ensure that this programme of work does continue. So just to wrap those elements up quite quickly. So just coming back to some of those elements, I think I said previously that there are a number of different papers that are separating some decision making on these items. So when I said about the next iteration of WASPI, there's an opportunity to make WASPI what is described as a code of conduct. That code of conduct, supported by the Information Commissioner's Office. No organisation in the UK yet has attained a code of conduct for anything that it's doing around under that kind of the auspices of the Information Commissioner's Office's responsibilities, i.e. GDPR and FOI. So part of the team have been heavily investing time with the ICO in order to understand whether WASPI is actually a good candidate to be the first code of conduct in the UK. Now, this kind of sets it in the same context as we're doing things like the National Information or the NIS Directive. So it kind of puts it in a directive form that actually pins organisations into more of a commitment to adopting WASPI and having good practice around the Wales Code for sharing personal information. So we're progressing that piece of work with Welsh Government sponsorship as well, so that we go out for consultation to see if the service would think that making WASPI a code of conduct would be a good thing to do, because once we're down that track, we then have to think about sustainability and how we actually do that, because it means there's some resource required in order to keep that as a code of conduct across Wales. But I think personally that's the next iteration that that's where we need to be with WASPI, because it's part of that framework again that actually promotes and helps demonstrate good governance arrangements when it comes to sharing data. I've mentioned quickly about the Information Governance Toolkit. Again, its responsibilities currently and its scope expands into primary care in the form of GPs and health boards, trusts, and those larger organisations. The toolkit really needs to expand into all of those other organisations that provide NHS services, the likes of community pharmacies, dentals, optoms, those spaces that we're currently getting more and more involved in, where there is some form of assurance provided by those organisations, but not necessarily as robust as it could be and as robust as it needs to be if they are looking to onboard and provide ever greater resource into those NHS services. So the toolkit expansion, from my perspective, is a really important facet that we need to consider as an organisation, and more collaboratively across Wales as well, in terms of making sure that organisations can measure themselves against some layer of assurance. The funding for the data protection officer for the GPs, as I've said, is based on subscription funding. We've recently been having discussions with GPC Wales around sustainability of that kind of that funding model, from at the very least from I suppose an annual uplift to meet on where we are with current resource prices and all of those type of things. So we have been looking at sort of inflationary uplifts for the data protection officer service, because the funding for that, or the subscription, hasn't changed over the last 3 to 4 years actually. The one bullet point there is that we're also in discussions as well around how DHCW can support what are called advanced clusters. So this is a cluster of GPs and other healthcare providers getting together in order to support their local and their geographical areas. So data protection officer function does support clusters to a certain extent, but not in the way it's currently we're currently looking at in terms of advanced clustering of some of those services, and certainly some of the sponsorship around that. So there's an internal report by a company called YMA that was looking to see how the data protection officer service might be able to support some of that advanced cluster work. But again, we have to look at what resources are required under those circumstances. And then last but not least is what I've described before, is where we build into a reprocurement of NIAS, and when we do that, and when is the most appropriate time to do that. But firstly, of course, with the support of the rest of the business, not least our commercial and procurement colleagues, is to understand what the business case might look like for the next iteration of NIAS as we build into kind of a much greater format, actually, in terms of what we need to do for ensuring that data is safe and secure using those type of systems to keep it safe. So that's, I suppose that kind of gives you a quick, some quick insight in terms of how we as an organisation are keeping patients, or helping to keep patient data safe. We are right in the middle of it from my perspective. We're very much influencing and leading the charge in terms of how we do that, not just from a data protection front, but obviously from all fronts that where colleagues are on the call today. So from my perspective, I'm keen to make sure that we keep moving the story on, and we keep improving what we do and what we do to facilitate those different organisations so that they have the same view of compliance as we do, and view of their responsibilities as we do, as well as we ever expand those services. As you said, Rowan, as we increase complexity, we need to increase our foundations, and IG as the framework is one of those foundations that we keep having to add the story to.
Well, that was really great, Darren. I think that was an excellent presentation, and you know, I hope if people are listening to the recording this far, they have now a picture of how this is embedded at a legislative level, as a monitoring throughout the architecture of the systems we operate, and through training of people and processes and accords. So that I think, you know, is a fantastic starting point. I'm keen that we have some eyes on to, you know, what we're doing with IG, and we raise its profile within DHCW, within the broader Welsh NHS and social care and beyond ecosystem, because, you know, at the heart of it, at the end of the day, data saves lives. It's one of the documents, and the Welsh population saw the benefit of the investment to date, as you said, in the pandemic. You know, the track and trace in Wales was very different to what was operated in England, and there was good evidence, really. I think that it was more effective, and it was certainly more cost effective. So incredibly positive. I suppose one of my questions, and I'll obviously invite comments and questions from the rest of the team, is you know, the systems, particularly things like NIAS, you know, they're monitoring, you know, how usable are they? You know, do those systems have to be inspected? Are there certain individuals who would have a dashboard sort of view of the systems to respond? And do we know how it's being used across the NHS? What's our visibility from where we sit today in DHCW?
There are a number of questions there, so I'll try and answer them in turn. NIAS is a very powerful tool. In itself, it is a very disclosive tool. If anything, it brings together lots of data from lots of systems, as I've just described: Welsh Clinical Portal, Welsh Patient Admin System, Welsh Demographic Service, so on and so forth. So it is a very disclosive. There's information contained therein, which effectively provides notifications of when there may be some anomalies within that access. Now, the majority of the times that access is legitimate. It just shows the complexity of how our health professionals are actually working across their own organisations and across their own, I suppose, their own core responsibilities sometimes. So NIAS will flag events that are perfectly legitimate. Sometimes, unfortunately, it will flag events that are where their events are not legitimate, and so employees are taken are held accountable under those actions and has to justify that. So health boards have a view of their own employee activity at a dashboard level that creates those notifications, and they see fit on how they act upon it. Some organisations use it a bit as a training exercise. Some organisations do it the very similar way that the police would do if you were caught speeding. So depending on the seriousness of some of that, they may increase the training for that individual because they hadn't realised what their responsibilities are, and they'd inadvertently access data that they shouldn't have, for instance, under very minor circumstances. But they will kind of do a speed awareness course with some individuals then to make sure that they're fully aware of their responsibilities. Some of the things that NIAS will reveal will unfortunately mean that then deploys workforce and OD, and there's disciplinary processes that come by that, and that perfectly legitimate reasons for actually doing that, and some will lead to instant dismissal in some respects. Very few and far between, I have to say. You know, generally there is the odd occasion where it gets into that level of formality. One thing to say that DHCW does not have access, whilst it creates the access, it doesn't have a view on those notifications of those access. So the policing is the responsibility of those organisations. What we do in order to make sure that those organisations make the most of NIAS and keep their end of the bargain, let's just say, in terms of making sure that patient data is safe under those circumstances, is those organisations are regularly reminded through the Medical Directors Network, actually, as part of Ridian's responsibilities, to remind medical directors as Caldecott guardians and with their other responsibilities that they should be really supporting the use of NIAS and supporting the resources required in order to do the monitoring to make sure that that collective responsibility of keeping information safe is actually upheld under all circumstances. And indeed, I think there's an action as well where Helen's going to write out to digital directors in order to reinforce that message. As an organisation, we are responsible for these component parts, but it is absolutely critical that those organisations again uphold that requirement.
Thank you, Darren. Ridian, you were mentioned there. Do you have anything to add to the conversation at the moment?
I think we can be assured that we're constantly looking at ways to protect individual citizens' data and to ensure that we have processes in place to make sure that we use the data appropriately. Primarily, of course, to ensure the best health outcomes possible, but also to learn. I think we're quite fortunate with Darren's leadership within that team. He develops a lot of staff and then go on to other positions within the organisation. So he's got quite a factory going there. But we have a collective responsibility to ensure that information governance in parallel with cybersecurity is at the front of everything that we do.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent, Ridian. And if we note nothing else on the chair's highlight board, I would like that last comment noted, Chris. Ridian, I'm going to thank Darren for that. It was an excellent presentation. I'm sure we'll return to the subject in the future. And if I can ask Ridian, you pick up 3.7 research and innovation strategy, please.
Okay, thank you. You will be cited on this from our previous meetings. We've taken some time, I think appropriately, to ensure that it sets the right message and the right direction of how we want to work. It's a nicely presented, clean document, which I think you'll find is readable. It's clearly articulates our 4 strategic aims, and that theme runs through through the document. Apologies, laughing. I can see a cat fly across your screen.
He was also muting you, Rydian, so he had to be evicted.
So I think the first thing we do is I commend it to the committee, and we can discuss it, but I think it's pretty self-evident from the content, and this is the way that we want to go in the future. So I don't have anything to add other than to ask you to note it, to accept it.
Thank you, Rydian, and you're right. We have discussed this, as a board and at various meetings, and the published document is very clear, and I think this is a beginning. So again, we will return to give us updates, I'm sure, on aspects of the R&I strategy and what work's being undertaken, and we look forward to hearing from it about it, I'm sure. Anything else from my colleagues to add to that? No. So excellent beginning, I think, Rydian, on that, and I look forward to what comes next.
Well, I would if Rachel was here, I would congratulate her on the way she's led this element of the programme. As it is, she can enjoy Boston.
Well, maybe Boston is a fair reward for all of her work. Okay, thank you for that. Closing matters, is there any other urgent business? No? Okay, so items for the Chair's highlight report to the board. Chris, I would like us to include the discussion of the corporate risks, particularly the analysis, and noting this difference between the target risk relating to the board risk appetite and the achievable risk. I think the board should be cited on that. And I think the other bit, other than to note that obviously the usual assurances reports were heard and in good order, is to highlight Darren's Keeping Patient Data Safe report. Is there anything else that people feel should be on the highlight board report? No?
Possibly the status of WEDS going to red. The executive leadership team will be aware of that, but the wider board ought to be made aware of that, I think.
Yes, David, I think that's a good point. So yes, could we include that?
Anything about IRLG? Just in terms of, they've done quite a lot of good work recently.
Yep, I think that's very fair. Okay, can we assure that happens? And the date of the next meeting here again, 2nd of February 2023, will be a year older. Thank you very much, and I will see you shortly. I think there's a comfort break before we reconvene for the private session. Thank you very much, everyone.